The millionaire's dog hid something in its kennel for days. What the millionaire discovered is unbelievable. The Blackwood mansion stood majestically on the hills of Sedona, Arizona, surrounded by lush gardens and the crisp mountain air. Isabella Blackwood, a successful 45-year-old businesswoman, watched from her window as Goofball, her beloved 5-year-old golden retriever, performed his morning routine. Something in his behavior had changed in recent days, and she couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern. "Edward," she called to her husband, a renowned 48-year-old veterinarian who had just finished his coffee. "Have you noticed anything strange about Goofball lately?" Edward looked up from his tablet, where he was reviewing the latest cases from his veterinary clinic. "Now that you mention it, he barely touched his food yesterday. Why do you ask?" Isabella approached the breakfast table, her heels softly echoing on the marble floor. "He's been acting differently for several days. He doesn't come running when I call him for breakfast anymore, and he spends hours in his wooden house. You know he normally can't sit still for even 5 minutes." The concern on Isabella's face was evident. Goofball wasn't just a pet. He was the first animal they had rescued together when they got married, and the catalyst that had led them to dedicate a large part of their fortune to animal protection. "This morning I tried to approach his house, but as soon as he saw me, he ran off to the garden," Isabella continued, nervously playing with her pearl necklace, a gift from Edward on their 10th anniversary. The Blackwood mansion was no ordinary residence. In addition to its spacious rooms and elegantly decorated bedrooms, it had an area specially designed for the care of rescued animals. Edward and Isabella had built first-class facilities to handle emergency cases, although they had not yet officially inaugurated them. Maria, the housekeeper who had been working for the family for 20 years, entered the dining room with a worried expression. "Mrs. Isabella, Goofball didn't want the special oatmeal I prepared for him this morning either. And yesterday I saw him carrying his favorite blanket towards his house." "His blanket," Edward frowned. "That blanket never leaves his bed in the living room." Isabella approached the window again, observing the wooden house that Edward had built especially for Goofball. It was an elegant structure, painted white with blue tiles, spacious enough for the dog to be comfortable. However, now it seemed to hold some kind of secret. "There's something else," added Maria, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a state secret. "Last night, when I went to close the garden windows, I heard strange sounds coming from the little house. They weren't the noises Goofball normally makes." Edward rose from his chair, his professional curiosity piqued. "What kind of sounds, Maria?" "Like small whimpers, sir, very soft, almost imperceptible." Isabella and Edward exchanged glances. In their years together, they had learned to trust Maria's instincts, who had a special sensitivity for detecting when something wasn't quite right in the house. "I'm going to investigate tonight," Edward decided. "If Goofball is sick or if there's something bothering him, we need to know. But be careful, my love," Isabella warned. "I don't want him to feel threatened or more nervous than he already is." The day passed with palpable tension in the mansion. Isabella tried to continue her work from home but couldn't concentrate. Every so often, she would approach the window to observe Goofball, who maintained a strange routine. He would briefly leave his house, look in all directions like a vigilant sentinel, and then quickly return inside. Edward, for his part, cancelled some appointments at his clinic to be able to return early. As a veterinarian, he had learned to trust animals' behavior as an indicator of important situations, and Goofball's behavior was definitely unusual. As the sun began to set over the mountains of Sedona, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Isabella and Edward dined in silence on the terrace, both keeping an eye on the wooden house and its mysterious occupant. "I know what's strangest," Isabella commented as she stirred her jasmine tea. "Despite his behavior, he doesn't seem scared or sick. It's as if he were protecting something." Edward nodded, thoughtful. "Or someone." Night had fallen over Sedona, and a soft breeze rustled the bougainvillea in the Blackwoods garden. Edward was preparing to investigate the mystery of Goofball's house, while Isabella watched from the terrace, nervously biting her lower lip. "Mrs. Isabella," Maria approached with a cup of chamomile tea in her hands. "For the nerves," she added with a maternal smile. "You know, this reminds me of when Goofball first came to the house." Isabella thanked her for the tea with a gesture and smiled at the memory. "He was so scared. He would hide behind the bushes and watch us with those sad eyes. And now look at him," Maria continued. "He's the happiest and most confident dog I've ever known. You brought back his joy. Edward appeared on the terrace equipped with a flashlight and his veterinary bag. Ready? He asked his wife. Edward, Isabella stopped him before he started down the stairs. Promise me that if there's something or someone in there, we'll be as patient as we were with Goofball. Her husband nodded, fully understanding the meaning of her words. The Blackwoods had built their life together around a promise to give second chances to those who needed them. As Edward cautiously approached the little house, the garden seemed to hold its breath. Goofball, who would normally be barking at any approach to his territory, remained surprisingly calm. Instead of showing aggression, the dog came out of his house and sat next to Edward, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Hey, buddy, Edward whispered, gently patting the animal's head. What have you been hiding in here? Goofball looked at Edward with his brown eyes full of intelligence and, to everyone's surprise, entered the house again, only to come out seconds later. This time he stayed at the entrance, as if inviting Edward to look inside. Isabella held her breath from the terrace, while Maria whispered a small prayer. Edward turned on his flashlight and bent down to look inside the house. At first, he only saw Goofball's favorite blanket, carefully arranged in a corner. But then a small movement caught his attention, followed by a faint meow. My God, Edward whispered. Isabella, Maria, come see this. Both women hurried down to the garden. As they approached, Edward carefully illuminated the interior of the house. There, curled up in Goofball's blanket, was a tiny white kitten, dirty and trembling. It's so small, Isabella whispered, tears in her eyes. How did it get here? The kitten, frightened by the unfamiliar voices, tried to hide deeper in the blanket. But Goofball entered the house and lay down next to it, as he had been doing for days, providing warmth and protection. Now I understand everything, said Maria, her voice breaking with emotion. The sounds I heard, Goofball's behavior. He's been taking care of this little creature all this time. Edward performed a quick visual examination of the kitten from where he was. It seems to be dehydrated and definitely needs medical attention. But the fact that it has survived, it's a miracle. And all thanks to Goofball. Isabella knelt next to the house, not caring that her expensive dress was getting stained with the damp grass. Edward, we have to help it. We can't leave it like this. Of course not, her husband responded with determination. But we must act very carefully. The kitten is scared and weak. We need to earn its trust, just like Goofball has done. Maria, always practical, was already making plans. I'll prepare one of the clinic rooms with everything necessary. And I'll warm up some milk. No, Maria, Edward gently interrupted her. No milk for now. It will need a special milk substitute and proper medical attention. We must first assess its condition. While the adults discussed the plan of action, Goofball remained next to the kitten, watching his humans with a look that seemed to say, Trust me, I know what I'm doing. The dog, who had been rescued years ago, had now become a rescuer himself. You know what's most extraordinary? Isabella reflected, watching the scene with moist eyes. Goofball not only protected it, but he also knew exactly how to care for it, as if he perfectly understood what it means to need help. Edward hugged his wife, sharing her emotion. Perhaps he understands it better than any of us, he responded softly. The emergency room of the veterinary clinic in the Blackwood mansion shone under the LED lights, while Edward carefully prepared the necessary instruments to examine the tiny kitten. Isabella, still in her elegant evening dress now stained with grass, held Goofball's blanket where the minuscule feline remained curled up. I need you to stay calm, Edward whispered to his wife, recognizing in her eyes the same anxiety he had seen 15 years ago when they rescued their first animal together. The kitten can sense our energy. Maria entered the room with Goofball, who had flatly refused to separate from his protege. The dog sat obediently in a corner, but his eyes never left the trembling bundle in Isabella's arms. Edward, Isabella's voice trembled slightly. Do you remember that promise we made on our trip to Napa Valley? Her husband nodded as he prepared the stethoscope. How could he forget? It had been during their honeymoon, when they found a market where animals were being sold in deplorable conditions. That day they swore they would dedicate their life and resources to changing the reality of abandoned animals. Mrs. Isabella, Maria gently interrupted. Should I call Miss Olivia? Maybe she can help. Olivia Sanders, Isabella's niece, was a renowned animal rights activist and blogger with great influence on social media. Her presence could be vital for what the Blackwoods were about to undertake. "No, Maria," Isabella responded, after a moment of reflection. "Not yet. First, we need to make sure the little one is stable. Besides, you know Olivia. As soon as she finds out, she'll want to turn this into a viral campaign." Edward began the examination with soft and precise movements. The kitten, surprisingly, allowed itself to be handled with less resistance than expected, as if it understood they were there to help. Goofball, from his corner, emitted a soft whimper of approval. "It's a male," Edward confirmed. "He can't be more than 6 weeks old. He's dehydrated and needs urgent nutritional attention, but I don't see signs of serious illness. He's a real fighter." Isabella felt her eyes fill with tears again. "Like someone else we know," she murmured, looking at Goofball. Maria, who had been silently organizing the medical supplies, paused for a moment. "Mom, do you remember when we found Goofball? He was in worse condition, and look at him now. He's the noblest dog I've ever known." The memory hit Isabella hard. Goofball had been found during a terrible storm, hiding under a car in downtown Sedona. Back then, he was just a scared and injured puppy. Edward had spent entire nights caring for him, while Isabella read him stories to keep him calm. "We'll need to give him vitamin supplements," Edward continued, carefully applying a subcutaneous hydrating solution, "and establish a specific feeding program. Maria, could you prepare the recovery room? The one with the view of the garden?" "Of course, Doctor," Maria responded, but before leaving she added, "You know, my grandmother always said that animals have a sixth sense for recognizing kind souls. Maybe that's why Goofball knew exactly where to bring this little one." As Maria left, Edward and Isabella exchanged significant looks. Their housekeeper, with her folk wisdom and ancestral sayings, often saw beyond the obvious. "What shall we call him?" Isabella asked, gently stroking the kitten's head, which was now purring weakly under the calming effects of the medication. "I think that decision belongs to Goofball," Edward responded with a smile, observing how his dog approached cautiously to supervise the procedure. After all, he found him first. At that moment, the kitten opened its eyes fully for the first time since they had brought it inside. They were a deep blue, almost turquoise, which dramatically contrasted with its white fur, now visible under the dirt. "Look at his eyes," Isabella whispered. "They're like the Sedona sky at dawn." "Aurora," Edward pronounced softly. "We could call him Aurora, like the dawn he represents in our lives." Goofball, as if approving the name, approached and gently rested his head on the examination table next to the kitten. Little Aurora, instead of being frightened, stretched a trembling paw towards his protector's muzzle. Isabella observed the scene with her heart swelling with emotion. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" she asked her husband, although she already knew the answer. Edward nodded, fully understanding what his wife meant. Fate had put Aurora in their path for a reason, and the Blackwoods had never been ones to ignore the signs of destiny. The morning sun flooded the recovery room when Olivia Sanders burst into the Blackwood mansion like a whirlwind of energy. With her pastel pink hair, strategically ripped jeans, and a professional camera hanging from her neck, the 28-year-old was the living image of the modern influencer. "Aunt Isabella," she exclaimed, hugging her aunt effusively. "Why didn't you call me last night? This is exactly what we need to boost the cause." Isabella exchanged a resigned look with Maria, who discreetly hid a smile as she continued changing Aurora's bedsheets. The kitten, considerably cleaner and somewhat stronger after a night of intensive care, observed the newcomer with curiosity from his thermal basket. "Olivia, honey," Isabella began in a conciliatory tone, "we wanted to make sure Aurora was stable first. You know that not everything has to become content for social media." "But Aunt," Olivia protested, already focusing her camera on the kitten, "this story is pure gold. A rescued dog that becomes a rescuer. It's the kind of content that can generate real change." Goofball, who had spent the night next to Aurora's basket, instinctively stepped between the camera and the kitten, provoking a soft laugh from Maria. "Looks like someone isn't ready to be an internet star," the housekeeper commented, earning a grateful look from Isabella. Edward entered the room at that moment, dressed in his veterinarian coat. "Olivia, I didn't know you'd come so early." "Uncle Edward," Olivia lowered her camera and hugged him. "Maria sent me a message last night. Do you already have plans for the facilities? Because I have some incredible ideas. We could create a documentary series about the process of transforming the mansion into a shelter. Imagine the impact. Isabella and Edward exchanged surprised looks. Olivia, with her inexhaustible energy and prominent social media presence, had always been a source of pride and occasional concern for the family. Her passion for animal rights was genuine, but her methods sometimes differed from her aunt and uncle's more traditional approach. "Olivia," Edward spoke calmly while checking Aurora's vital signs, "we appreciate your enthusiasm, but we need to proceed with caution. This isn't just about raising awareness. We're talking about legal responsibilities, sanitary protocols." "Exactly," Olivia interrupted, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "And we can document the entire process. Show the reality behind establishing a professional shelter. Educate people about the responsibility it entails. Imagine how many people could learn from your experience." Maria, who had finished organizing the medical supplies, approached Olivia with a cup of coffee. "Miss Olivia, why don't we all sit down for breakfast? Mrs. Isabella has barely eaten since last night." Olivia accepted the coffee, but her mind was already working at full speed. "We could start with Goofball's story, show how a rescued dog became a hero, then continue with Aurora and document his recovery. The possibilities are endless." Isabella observed her niece with a mixture of affection and concern. Olivia was right in many aspects. Their story could inspire others and raise awareness, but she also feared that media exposure could affect the tranquility that both Aurora and Goofball needed. "I have an idea," Edward proposed, always the mediator. "Why don't you help us develop a comprehensive communication plan? Something that respects Aurora's recovery times and allows us to establish the shelter in a professional manner." Olivia was about to respond when a soft meow interrupted the conversation. Aurora had tried to stand up in his basket, wobbling slightly. Goofball immediately approached, providing support with his body while the kitten took his first unsteady steps. The moment was so pure, so natural, that even Olivia lowered her camera, understanding that some things were too sacred to be captured on video. "All right," she finally conceded, with unusual softness in her voice. "We'll do this your way, but promise me that when you're ready, you'll let me tell your story. The world needs more examples like this." Isabella hugged her niece, moved by this flash of maturity. "Thank you, honey. And you're right. This story deserves to be told. We just need to find the right time and way." Maria, observing the scene with satisfaction, began to silently organize breakfast on the terrace, adjacent to the recovery room. The morning in Sedona promised to be beautiful, and with it, new horizons were opening for the Blackwood family. The afternoon fell over Sedona as Olivia reviewed old family albums in the mansion's library. Her fingers slid over a particular photograph. Her at 12 years old, holding her first rescued cat with Isabella and Edward by her side. "You were always a rebel with a cause." Isabella's voice surprised her from the door. "Your mother almost fainted when you came home with that stray cat." Olivia smiled, remembering that day. "Sarah never understood my passion for animals. I guess that's why I always felt closer to you." Isabella sat next to her niece, observing the photograph. "Your mother, my dear sister, was always more traditional. But look how far you've come. Over 1 million followers who share your love for animals. Sometimes I wonder if she would be proud," Olivia murmured, closing the album. "It's been 3 years since we last spoke, since I left law school to dedicate myself to this." At that moment, Maria entered with a tray of tea and freshly baked cookies. "Miss Olivia, I found these vegan cookies you like so much at the market, and Mr. Edward asks if you can come to the clinic. Aurora is trying to walk alone." Both women immediately stood up. In the days since his rescue, Aurora had shown remarkable recovery, although he still needed Goofball's constant presence to feel secure. In the clinic, Edward was observing with professional attention as Aurora took shaky steps on a small mat. Goofball, as always, was by his side, ready to provide support if needed. "It's incredible," Edward commented as he saw them enter. "His survival instinct is extraordinary. It reminds me of someone else we know." He looked significantly at Olivia. The young influencer blushed slightly. Her uncle's comment transported her to those difficult days after leaving university, when she slept on friends' couches while trying to build her social media presence. "Uncle," Olivia approached the mat, observing Aurora's efforts. "I've been thinking, Maybe we could start with something small, a blog documenting Aurora's recovery, but from a medical and professional perspective. No sensationalism, just the truth. Isabella and Edward exchanged surprised looks at this new, more mature approach from their niece. Actually, Olivia continued, I've already been researching all the legal requirements to establish an official shelter, the necessary certifications, sanitary protocols. I even contacted some of my followers who are veterinarians and are willing to help as volunteers. Edward smiled proudly. Looks like someone has been doing their homework. I learned from the best, Olivia replied, winking at her uncle. Plus, I have another proposal. What do you think about organizing a small event? We invite some professionals from the field, veterinarians, serious activists. We could present the shelter project and start building a support network. Maria, who had been silently organizing the medical supplies, intervened. Miss Olivia is right. We'll need all the help we can get, and I have the contacts of several veterinarians who have worked with Dr. Edward over the years saved. Isabella approached Aurora, who was now resting next to Goofball after his exercise session. You know, Olivia, when you were little, you always said you wanted to change the world. Back then, we thought it was just a childish dream. And now? Olivia asked, joining her aunt next to the animals. Now I believe you were destined to do it, Isabella replied softly. You just needed to find your own path. The silence that followed was interrupted by a soft purr from Aurora, who had curled up between Goofball's paws. The scene was a living testimony to how love and compassion could transcend all barriers. By the way, Edward added, checking his phone, I just received a message from the Arizona Veterinary Association. They're interested in seeing our facilities. It seems your network of contacts is already bearing fruit, Olivia. The young woman smiled, but her expression quickly turned serious. Aunt Isabella, Uncle Edward, I know I can be impulsive sometimes, and that my focus on social media may seem superficial. But I want you to know that everything I do because I believe in the same cause as you. We know, my love, Isabella replied, hugging her niece, and that's why we're sure this shelter will be a success, because it has the right ingredients, professionalism, passion, and above all, true love for animals. The Blackwood mansion was buzzing with activity as preparations for the shelter's presentation event took shape. Isabella supervised the installation of tents in the garden, while Olivia coordinated with a team of professionals who would live-stream the event for her channel. The tents should be closer to the clinic, Isabella suggested, pointing to the area. We want guests to be able to see the medical facilities without compromising the animals' tranquility. Maria appeared with a tray of coffee for the workers, when a commotion at the main entrance caught everyone's attention. An older woman, elegantly dressed but looking agitated, was arguing with the security guard. I'm telling you I need to speak with the owners, the woman insisted. It's about the white kitten. Isabella and Olivia exchanged concerned looks before hurrying to the entrance. The woman, upon seeing them, stepped forward with determination. I'm Sophia Green, she introduced herself, her voice trembling slightly. I live in the house with the bougainvillea garden, 3 streets from here. I've been looking for my Snowflake's kittens for weeks. Olivia immediately took out her phone, ready to document the encounter, but Isabella stopped her with a significant look. Please come in, Isabella invited, guiding the woman to the terrace. Maria, could you bring us some chamomile tea? Edward, who had been in the clinic with Aurora and Goofball, joined them upon hearing the voices. Mrs. Green, now calmer but visibly emotional, began to tell her story. My Snowflake was a stray cat that I started feeding a few months ago. She became part of my family, she explained, gratefully accepting the cup of tea that Maria offered her. A few weeks ago, she gave birth to 4 beautiful kittens, all white like her. But then that terrible storm came. Isabella instinctively squeezed Edward's hand, the same storm that had brought Goofball into their lives years ago. The kittens disappeared during the storm, Mrs. Green continued, her eyes filling with tears. Snowflake looked for them for days, meowing incessantly. This morning my gardener told me he had heard about a white kitten rescued at the Blackwood mansion. Olivia, who had remained unusually silent, gently intervened. What happened to Snowflake, the mother? Mrs. Green's expression darkened. She weakened, looking for her babies. I took her to the vet, but... Her voice broke, unable to continue. Edward stood up. Mrs. Green, would you like to see Aurora? That's the name we gave the kitten. The woman nodded, wiping away her tears. As they walked to the clinic, Isabella noticed that Olivia kept her camera off, understanding that some moments were too sacred to be filmed. In the recovery room, Aurora was playing with a small toy while Goofball watched over him protectively. Upon seeing the visitors, the dog tensed slightly but remained calm. Mrs. Green slowly approached the bed where Aurora was. The kitten looked at her with his bright blue eyes, the same ones that, according to the lady, he had inherited from Snowflake. "It's him," she whispered. "He has the same grey spot on his left ear. He's the smallest of the litter." Aurora, as if recognizing something familiar in the woman, curiously approached. Goofball, always attentive, stayed close but allowed the interaction. "The other kittens," Isabella began delicately. "We never found them," Mrs. Green responded, gently stroking Aurora. "But knowing that at least one survived, and that he's being so well cared for, Snowflake would be at peace." Olivia, who had been observing the scene in silence, finally spoke. "Mrs. Green, would you like to be part of our project? Your experience with stray cats could be invaluable for the shelter." The woman looked at her surprised. "Me, but I'm just a widow who takes care of cats." "You're much more than that," Isabella intervened. "You're someone who understands the value of every life, no matter how small. You're exactly the kind of person we need." Edward nodded, adding, "Besides, Aurora will need a godmother who knows his full story." Maria, who had been watching from the door, smiled. "Coincidences don't exist, Mrs. Green. If you're here today, it's for a reason." Mrs. Green looked around, at Aurora playing confidently, at Goofball standing guard, at the hopeful faces of the Blackwoods and Olivia. For the first time since losing Snowflake, she felt that something good could come from her loss. The dawn light filtered through the windows of the Blackwood Mansion's kitchen, where Maria and Mrs. Green shared their experiences while preparing breakfast. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked sweet bread filled the air. "So you started like this too?" Mrs. Green asked as she cut fruit. "Taking care of stray animals?" Maria smiled, remembering. "Yes, ma'am. When I came to work here 20 years ago, Mrs. Isabella was just beginning her mission to help animals. Back then, many thought it was just a rich woman's whim. Like my late husband," Mrs. Green sighed. "He never understood why I spent so much time and money feeding stray cats. But now," her eyes moistened as she thought of Snowflake. Olivia entered the kitchen at that moment, her pink hair tied in a messy bun and dark circles under her eyes. She had spent the night working on the presentation for the event. "Good morning," she greeted, heading straight for the coffee maker. "Mrs. Green, have you seen the progress on the shelter's website? I included your story with Snowflake in the testimonials section." "Oh, sweetie," the older woman responded. "I'm still not used to all this internet stuff. But I trust your judgment." Maria exchanged a knowing look with Mrs. Green. In recent days, Olivia's frantic energy had been transforming into something more focused, more mature. "Olivia," Isabella called from the kitchen door, "your mother is on the phone." Silence fell over the kitchen like a heavy curtain. Olivia tensed her shoulders, her hand tightening around the coffee mug. "I don't want to talk to her," she responded dryly. "She says she saw the announcement of the event on your social media. She wants to come." Olivia turned abruptly. "Come? After 3 years without speaking to me? After telling me I was wasting my life by dropping out of law school?" Mrs. Green and Maria exchanged uncomfortable looks, but remained in the kitchen, their presence offering silent support. "She's your mother, Olivia," Isabella said softly, "and she's still my sister." "A sister who criticized you for years for dedicating yourself to animals," Olivia replied. "Who said you and Uncle Edward were wasting your fortune on insignificant causes?" Edward appeared at that moment, still in his veterinarian coat. "Aurora just finished his morning exercises. He's getting stronger every day." The change of topic was intentional, and everyone appreciated it. Olivia visibly relaxed upon hearing about the kitten. "How is Goofball dealing with all this?" Mrs. Green asked, genuinely interested. "It must be exhausting for him to always be watching over Aurora." "On the contrary," Edward smiled. "It seems that taking care of Aurora has given him a new purpose. It's as if he had found his calling," Olivia completed softly. Her eyes met her Aunt Isabella's and something passed between them, a silent understanding. "You know," Olivia continued after a moment, Maybe Mom should come to the event. Maybe she needs to see for herself what my waste of time has turned into. Maria approached Olivia and squeezed her shoulder affectionately. Sometimes, honey, people need time to understand that there are many ways to do something meaningful with life. Like me, Mrs. Green interjected. I spent years feeling like my neighbors were judging me for being the crazy cat lady. And look at me now, part of such an important project. Isabella sat next to her niece. Olivia, your mother is proud, like all Blackwoods. But the fact that she wants to come, that means something. Besides, Edward added with a smile, wait until she meets Aurora. No one can resist those blue eyes. Olivia laughed softly, the tension gradually leaving her shoulders. Okay, but on one condition. I want Aurora and Goofball to be present at the event. They are the heart of all this. Are you sure? Isabella asked. There will be a lot of people, cameras. Completely, Olivia affirmed. The world needs to see what love and compassion can achieve. And they are the living proof. Maria began to serve breakfast, while the conversation flowed towards the final preparations for the event. In the garden, the sun illuminated the white tents that were already installed, and in the clinic, Goofball and Aurora slept peacefully, oblivious to the human dramas unfolding around them. The Blackwood mansion shone under the afternoon sun. The white tents swayed gently in the breeze as guests began to arrive for the shelter's inaugural event. Olivia, dressed in an elegant emerald green pantsuit, supervised the last details while trying to control her nervousness. Everything is perfect, Maria assured, adjusting a centerpiece. And the suit looks beautiful on you, Miss Olivia. Your mother always said green brought out your eyes. The mention of Sarah made Olivia tense. Has she arrived yet? She asked, trying to sound casual while checking her phone for the umpteenth time. Not yet, Maria responded softly. But your Aunt Isabella is at the main entrance waiting for her. In the clinic, Edward was performing a final checkup on Aurora, who had grown considerably in the past few weeks. The kitten, now stronger and more lively, played with a ribbon while Goofball watched attentively from his usual spot. Are you ready for your big debut? Edward asked his most special patients. Mrs. Green, who had become a constant presence in the clinic, smiled from the door. Aurora is so different from that scared kitten you found, the older woman commented, approaching to pet the feline. Snowflake would be proud. A commotion at the main entrance interrupted the moment. Olivia, who was passing by, froze upon hearing a familiar voice. Isabella, what an exaggeration all this is. Was so much spectacle really necessary? Sarah Blackwood, impeccably dressed in a Chanel suit, observed the facilities with a mixture of amazement and criticism. At 55, she maintained the elegant bearing and beauty she had passed on to her daughter, although her expression denoted a certain rigidity. Sister, Isabella responded calmly, this is not a spectacle. It's a dream come true. Olivia took a deep breath and went to meet her mother. Time seemed to stand still when their gazes met. Olivia, Sarah pronounced her daughter's name as if it were a word in a foreign language. Your hair. It's pink. It has been for 3 years, Mom, Olivia responded, maintaining her composure. The same amount of time you've gone without seeing me. The tension was interrupted by a cheerful bark. Goofball, closely followed by Aurora, had decided to make their appearance at the perfect moment. The kitten, showing unexpected confidence, approached Sarah directly and rubbed against her designer-clad legs. Be careful with the suit, Sarah exclaimed, but her voice lacked its usual authoritative tone. There was something in Aurora's blue eyes that disconcerted her. It's incredible, isn't it? Mrs. Green interjected, who had approached the group. How these little ones can melt even the hardest heart. And you are? Sarah asked, trying to regain her composure. I'm Aurora's godmother, Mrs. Green responded with dignity. And I can tell you that your daughter has done something extraordinary here. They all have. Olivia watched the scene, holding her breath. Her mother, the impeccable lawyer Sarah Blackwood, was being disarmed by a stray kitten and a cat-loving widow. Mom, Olivia finally said, finding her voice, I know it's not the life you planned for me. That you wanted me to follow in your footsteps at the law firm, to become a respectable lawyer. But this is who I really am. Guests were beginning to fill the garden, including recognized veterinarians, activists, and local personalities. Olivia's cameras were live streaming for her followers, capturing the moment when the Blackwoods' dream was becoming a reality. Sarah observed her surroundings, the modern clinic, the gathered professionals, the evident respect everyone showed towards her daughter. And then she looked at Aurora, who now rested comfortably in Olivia's arms, with Goofball faithfully by her side. "When you dropped out of university," Sarah began, her voice softer than usual, "I thought you were making the biggest mistake of your life. That everything your father and I had built, what you built allowed me to find my own path," Olivia gently interrupted. "And look at what we've achieved." Isabella approached her sister and took her arm. "Sarah, do you remember when we were girls and we rescued that injured bird? Do you remember the feeling of doing something truly meaningful?" Sarah's eyes moistened slightly, a gesture so subtle that only those who knew her well would notice. "Dad got so angry when we ruined his gardenias trying to build a nest. But the bird was saved," Isabella completed. "And that feeling, that's the one Olivia has turned into her life." The event was in full swing. The gardens of the Blackwood mansion bustled with activity as Olivia guided guests through the new facilities. Her presentation was professional and passionate, mixing technical data with the emotional story of Aurora and Goofball. Sarah observed from a prudent distance, noting with surprise how her daughter handled the situation with a natural grace she had never seen in her during her years as a law student. Isabella smiled proudly beside her. "It's incredible," Sarah murmured, more to herself than to her sister. "She has the entire room hanging on her every word." "She was always like that," Isabella replied. "We just tried to make her shine on a stage that wasn't hers before." At that moment, Edward approached the podium to begin his presentation on the medical aspects of the shelter. Olivia joined her mother and Isabella, nervous about Sarah's reaction to the next part of the program. "Mom," Olivia whispered, "there's something you should see." A video was projected on the main screen. It was a compilation of moments captured during Aurora's recovery. The kitten taking his first steps with Goofball as support, the stormy nights where the dog protected him, the therapy sessions where both animals showed an extraordinary connection. "This is the true magic of what we do," Olivia narrated in the video. "We don't just save lives, we create second chances. Like the one I received when I decided to follow my heart." Sarah felt something breaking inside her as she heard those words. She remembered the day Olivia announced she was leaving university, the terrible argument that followed, the hurtful words they both uttered. "Mrs. Sarah," Mrs. Green's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. The older woman was holding Aurora in her arms. "Would you like to hold him? He has a special gift for recognizing people who need healing." Before she could protest, the kitten nimbly jumped into her arms. Sarah, by instinct, held him against her chest. Aurora began to purr softly, his blue eyes fixed on her with a gaze that seemed to pierce through all her defenses. "It's extraordinary," Maria commented, who had approached with a tray of appetizers. "Aurora has the same effect that Miss Olivia had as a child. Do you remember how she used to bring injured animals home?" Sarah nodded, remembering every bird, every kitten, every stray dog her daughter had tried to save. Back then she had seen it as a phase, something she would outgrow over time. I was wrong," she finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Olivia, who had been holding her breath, felt her eyes filling with tears. "Mom!" A commotion near the clinic interrupted the moment. Goofball had started barking, but not aggressively. It was more of a call bark of urgency. Edward hurried towards the area, followed by Olivia and several guests. At the clinic entrance, Goofball was next to a small cardboard box that someone had left. Inside, a small puppy trembled, clearly scared and hungry. "Looks like we already have our first official rescue," Edward commented, quickly examining the puppy. Sarah, still holding Aurora, watched as her daughter knelt next to the puppy, not caring that her pantsuit was getting dirty. She saw her work in perfect sync with her uncle, applying knowledge she had acquired on her own, driven by pure passion and determination. "Olivia," Sarah called, her voice softer than her daughter remembered hearing in years. Could you show me more about what you do here?" The silence that followed was broken by Aurora's purr and Goofball's soft bark, as if both animals were celebrating a long-awaited victory. "Of course, Mom," Olivia responded with a radiant smile. "Where do you want to start?" Isabella and Edward exchanged knowing looks, while Maria and Mrs. Green discreetly wiped tears from their eyes. At that moment, under the afternoon sun in Sedona, everyone understood that they were witnessing not just the inauguration of a shelter, but the birth of a new form of understanding between mother and daughter. I think, Sarah said, gently stroking Aurora, that I want to know everything, especially how I can help. The morning after the event dawned with a different energy at the Blackwood mansion. Olivia found her mother in the clinic, dressed in a protective gown over her impeccable designer outfit, attentively observing as Edward examined the puppy rescued the day before. "Have you been here all night?" Olivia asked, surprised. Sarah startled slightly. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "After everyone left, I stayed helping Maria and Mrs. Green with the final preparations for the puppy. He's so small." Edward smiled as he completed the examination. "And very lucky. He seems to be only dehydrated and in need of good nutrition. Whoever left him here knew exactly what they were doing." "What do you mean, Uncle?" Olivia asked, approaching to pet the puppy. "The box had ventilation holes, a clean blanket, and was left right where Goofball would find it quickly," Edward explained. "Whoever brought him trusted that we would take care of him." Sarah nervously adjusted her pearl necklace, a gesture that Olivia recognized from her childhood. It was what her mother did when she was processing a difficult idea. "It's because they trust you," Sarah finally said, "in what you've built here. Yesterday during the event, I saw how people looked at you. It wasn't just professional respect, it was genuine admiration." At that moment, Aurora trotted into the clinic, faithfully followed by Goofball. The kitten, now much more confident, jumped directly onto Sarah's lap, who received him with a naturalness that surprised everyone, including herself. "You know, Olivia," Sarah continued, absent-mindedly petting Aurora, "last night I was thinking about all the legal documents you'll need to expand the shelter. Permits, certifications, constitution of the foundation." Olivia held her breath. "Mom, are you suggesting—" "I'm one of the best corporate lawyers in Arizona," Sarah responded, with a smile that softened years of tension. "And I think it's time I use that experience for something truly meaningful." Maria, who had entered silently with breakfast, exchanged a knowing look with Edward. "Coffee is served on the terrace," she announced. "And Mrs. Isabella is waiting with some special guests." On the terrace, they found Isabella gathered with 3 of the most prestigious veterinarians who had attended the event, along with Mrs. Green, who already seemed an indispensable part of the team. "Olivia, Sarah," Isabella called, "you arrived just in time. We were discussing the possibility of creating a network of shelters throughout Arizona." The rescued puppy, which Edward had brought with them, began to play with Aurora under Goofball's watchful supervision. The scene caught the attention of all present. "It's extraordinary," one of the veterinarians commented. "The way Goofball has assumed the role of protector, and how Aurora now helps integrate other animals. It's as if they perfectly understand their mission." Sarah observed her daughter, who was attentively listening to the conversation while taking notes on her tablet. She no longer saw the rebellious young woman who had dropped out of university. She saw a confident and passionate woman who had found her true purpose. "Olivia," Sarah gently interrupted, "what do you think if we work together on the legal aspect of the expansion? We could create a structure that allows replicating this model in other places." Olivia's smile lit up her face. "Are you serious?" "Completely," Sarah nodded. "Besides, I think you'll need help with all the contracts and permits that will arise after yesterday's success. Social media is full of comments about the event." "Speaking of that," Mrs. Green intervened, "several neighbors have asked if they can volunteer. And a local school wants to organize educational visits." Isabella watched the scene with contained tears of happiness. Her niece and her sister finally working together, the dream she had shared with Edward so many years ago, taking a bigger and more beautiful form than they had ever imagined. "I think," Edward said, raising his coffee cup, "we should make a toast to new beginnings, second chances, and the miracles that happen when we open our hearts. And to Aurora and Goofball," Olivia added, "who taught us that love knows no barriers." Sarah, with Aurora purring in her lap and years of prejudices crumbling in her heart, also raised her cup. "To my daughter," she said with an emotional voice, "who had the courage to follow her heart when I didn't have the wisdom to understand it." The library of the Blackwood mansion had become an impromptu legal office. Sarah, surrounded by documents and wearing her reading glasses, meticulously reviewed every detail of the papers for the Foundation's constitution. Olivia, seated across from her, alternated between updating the shelter's social media and taking notes on her mother's suggestions. "It's fascinating," Sarah commented, looking up from a document. You've built a truly engaged digital community. Comments about the event keep coming in. Olivia smiled, still surprised by her mother's genuine interest in her work. It's incredible how Aurora and Goofball's story has touched so many hearts. People identify with second chances. Maria entered with a tray of tea and her traditional cinnamon cookies. Mrs. Sarah, Dr. Edward asks if you can come to the clinic. He says there's something you need to see. Mother and daughter exchanged intrigued looks before heading to the clinic. They found Edward examining the rescued puppy with an expression of amazement on his face. Goofball was especially agitated, moving between the puppy and the humans as if trying to communicate something. "What's going on, Uncle?" Olivia asked, noticing the tension in the air. Edward lifted the puppy, showing a peculiar mark on its chest, a white spot in the shape of a star, almost identical to the one Goofball had. "I just noticed it during the bath, but there's more. The DNA tests we performed as protocol. This puppy is related to Goofball. They're probably from the same family." Sarah brought a hand to her mouth, surprised. "Are you saying that—" "It's very likely they're from the same original litter," Edward confirmed. "Goofball was found during a storm 5 years ago, remember? We never knew if he had siblings." Olivia approached the puppy, closely observing the mark. "That's why Goofball reacted so intensely when we found him. Somehow he knew." Mrs. Green, who had been listening from the door, intervened. "As I told you, animals have a sixth sense for these things. It's no coincidence that the puppy was left precisely here." Aurora, who had been napping in his special bed, curiously approached the group. The kitten, now almost completely recovered, had become a fundamental element of the shelter, always attentive to new rescues. "We need to investigate more about this," Sarah decided, surprising everyone with her determination. "If there are more siblings out there—" "Mom," Olivia gently interrupted, "are you suggesting we actively search for Goofball's family?" "Why not?" Sarah responded, absent-mindedly petting Aurora, who had rubbed against her legs. "We have the resources, the contacts. We could use your social media to spread the story." Edward smiled, remembering past times. "Sarah, your eyes are shining exactly like when we were kids, and you were planning our adventures." "Well," she responded, adjusting her glasses with a characteristic gesture, "let's say I'm rediscovering parts of myself that I had forgotten." Maria, who had been observing the scene in silence, approached the puppy. "What shall we call him? If he's Goofball's family, he deserves a special name." Olivia observed the puppy, who was now playing animatedly with Aurora under Goofball's watchful gaze. "How about Star, for the mark on his chest, and because he has guided us towards a new adventure?" "Star," Sarah repeated, savoring the name. "I like it. It represents hope, guidance, everything this shelter means." "And speaking of meanings," Edward added, "I think we should consider expanding our DNA testing program. We could create a database to help reunite more separated animal families." Olivia's eyes lit up. "That would be amazing. We could create a specific social media campaign, maybe partner with other shelters." "One moment," Sarah interrupted, taking out her tablet. "Let me take notes. We'll need special permits for handling genetic data, establish protocols." Mrs. Green smiled, observing how mother and daughter began to work together, complementing their different skills and perspectives. "You know, sometimes destiny has very peculiar ways of uniting families." Maria nodded, adding, "Both human families and animal ones." While the group discussed the details of the new project, Goofball lay down next to Star, with Aurora curled up between them. The image seemed to be a perfect reflection of what was happening with the humans. Different generations, different stories, coming together to create something extraordinary. The social media campaign to find Goofball's family had exceeded all expectations. Olivia watched in amazement the statistics on her computer. Over 1 million shares, comments coming from all over Arizona and even from abroad. The story had touched a sensitive chord in people's hearts. "It's incredible," Sarah commented, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed the messages alongside her daughter. "Look at this comment from a lady in Flagstaff. She says Goofball and Star's story reminds her of a pair of dogs she used to see near the Central Market years ago." Olivia leaned in to read better. "Does she say they also had the star-shaped mark?" "According to her, they were part of a family of dogs much loved in the neighborhood," Sarah continued. "People fed them and took care of them. until a terrible storm separated them. Edward entered the library with a cup of coffee in hand. The storm from 5 years ago? The same one in which we found Goofball? Exactly, Sarah responded, her lawyer's mind already connecting the dots. And look at the date. It matches perfectly. Maria appeared at the door with an expression of contained excitement. Miss Olivia, you have a call. It's a veterinarian from Flagstaff. She says she has important information. Olivia activated the speakerphone on her phone, allowing everyone to listen. Dr. Rachel Gordon, with over 30 years of experience in the area, had a surprising story to tell. We knew them as the Market family, the veterinarian explained. The mother was a golden retriever with a peculiar white mark on her chest, and the father had the same pattern. They had a litter of 6 puppies, all with the same characteristic mark. 6? Olivia whispered, looking at her Uncle Edward. Yes, Dr. Gordon continued. The community took care of them. We had even scheduled a responsible adoption campaign. But then came the storm of 2019. It was devastating. The dogs scattered, and we could only find 3 of the puppies. Mrs. Green, who had been listening from her usual place near the window, approached with Aurora in her arms. What happened to the ones they found? They were adopted by local families, the veterinarian replied. In fact, when I saw your post about Goofball and Star, I immediately recognized the mark. It's identical to that family's. Olivia felt her heart racing. Doctor Gordon, would it be possible to contact the families who adopted the other puppies? They're already aware, the veterinarian responded with a smile in her voice. In fact, one of the families is organizing to travel to Sedona this weekend. Sarah, who had been taking meticulous notes, intervened. Doctor, will need documentation to support all of this. Veterinary records, photographs, anything that can help us confirm the connection. Of course, the doctor replied. I'm already preparing a complete file. I also have videos of the dogs at the market. Wait, I'll send you one now. Seconds later, Olivia's phone vibrated with a notification. The video, although somewhat blurry from the years, clearly showed a family of golden retriever dogs playing near the market. The star-shaped mark was visible on all of them. It's undeniable, Edward murmured, observing the video with a clinical eye. The facial structure, the pattern of the mark, they're definitely from the same family. Goofball, who had been dozing under the desk, raised his head upon hearing the audio from the video. His ears moved with interest, and he emitted a soft whine. He knows, Mrs. Green said softly. Somehow, he always knew. This is bigger than us, Olivia reflected. We're not just reuniting a family, we're uncovering a story of community love that extended for years. Sarah took off her glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully. Olivia, I think we should organize something special for the weekend. A proper reunion. I'm already on it, Maria responded from the door where she had remained listening. We could use the central garden where Goofball found Star. And we must document everything, Olivia added, her mind already working on the narrative. This story could inspire more people to search for and reunite separated animal families. Star chose that moment to trot into the library, followed by Aurora. The puppy, now stronger and healthier, went directly to Goofball curling up next to him. Look at that, Edward smiled. Blood calls to blood. Not just blood, Sarah corrected, observing her daughter with affection. Love also calls to love. Olivia felt her eyes moistening as she observed the scene. Her mother fully involved in the project, her proud uncle, Maria, and Mrs. Green excited, and the animals that had started all of this, united in a perfect circle of affection and loyalty. The garden of the Blackwood mansion shone under the morning sun as preparations for the grand meeting took shape. Maria and Mrs. Green supervised the arrangement of canopies and chairs, while Olivia organized the recording equipment that would document the historic moment. Olivia, Sarah called from the terrace. Another email arrived from Dr. Gordon. The young woman bounded up the stairs 2 at a time, her pink hair swaying with the movement. She found her mother in the library, with an indecipherable expression on her face. What's wrong, Mum? Bad news? Sarah shook her head, removing her glasses to wipe away a traitorous tear. On the contrary, the doctor found more information about Goofball's family. And there's something you need to see. On the computer screen, a series of photographs showed the Flagstaff market 5 years ago. In one of them, partially visible in the background, A young woman with a camera could be seen photographing the family of dogs. "Wait," Olivia whispered, leaning in closer. Is that me?" "It is," Sarah confirmed softly. "It was during that trip you took to Flagstaff, the one that caused our first big argument, when you decided to leave university." Olivia sank into a chair, overwhelmed by memories. That trip had been a turning point in her life. She had gone to Flagstaff supposedly for a law school project, but in reality, she was searching for her true path. "I can't believe it," she murmured. "I photographed Goofball's family years before meeting him. I even shared those photos on my first blog about stray animals." Edward entered the library at that moment, followed by Goofball and Star. "Do you remember what inspired you to start that blog?" Olivia nodded, the pieces fitting in her mind like a puzzle. "It was that family of dogs in Flagstaff. The way the community cared for them, how they stayed together despite adversities. It was what made me take the leap, what convinced me that there was another way to use my voice to make a difference." Sarah approached her daughter, taking her hands in hers. "When you showed me those photos and told me you wanted to leave your career, I only saw the failure of our plans. I didn't see the passion, the purpose behind it." "Mom." "No, let me finish," Sarah insisted. "Fate has a curious way of working. Those dogs you photographed, that inspired you to follow your heart. One of them found his way to you, and now he's helping others exactly as you do." Maria appeared at the door, her face lit up with a smile. "Mrs. Sarah, Miss Olivia, the first families are arriving." In the garden, 3 cars were stopping in front of the mansion. From them descended families with golden retriever dogs, each with the unmistakable star-shaped mark on its chest. Goofball, who had been calm until that moment, approached the window and emitted a soft whine. Star imitated him, their tails wagging with anticipation. "It's time," Edward said, putting on his veterinarian coat. "The DNA tests have already confirmed the relationship. These are definitely the siblings that were adopted in Flagstaff." Olivia stood up, wiping away tears. "You know what's most incredible, Mom? That all of this began because I followed my intuition that day in Flagstaff, because I dared to be different." "No, my love," Sarah corrected gently. "It began because you were authentically yourself. And I'm so proud of the woman you've become." Mrs. Green appeared with Aurora in her arms, the kitten more excited than ever. "Animals always know," she commented with her usual wisdom. "They knew this day would come." The sound of joyful barks filled the air as families began to gather in the garden. Olivia picked up her professional camera, the same one she had used in Flagstaff years ago. "This time," she said, looking at her mother, "will you join me in documenting the moment?" Sarah smiled, picking up the tablet where she had been organizing the shelter's legal documents. "Always, my love. This time and all the ones to come." As they descended to the garden, where Goofball and Star were already running towards their newly arrived siblings, Olivia felt that a perfect circle was closing in her life. The young woman who had photographed a family of dogs in Flagstaff, searching for her purpose, had finally found her place in the world. And her mother, who had once opposed that path, now walked proudly by her side. The garden of the Blackwood mansion had transformed into a scene of magical reunions. Goofball and Star ran in circles with their 3 newly arrived siblings, their star-shaped marks shining under the Sedona sun. Olivia captured every moment with her camera, while Sarah took notes on her tablet, her eyes bright with emotion. "It's incredible," commented Elena Martinez, one of the adoptive families from Flagstaff. "Luna always had this special behavior, as if she was looking for something. Now I understand she was remembering her siblings." Edward observed the interaction between the dogs with professional fascination. "It's amazing how, despite the years apart, they maintain that instinctive bond. Look how Goofball naturally leads the group, just like he did with Aurora." The white kitten, as if he had heard his name, strolled among the reunited dogs with total confidence, occasionally rubbing against them in a sign of approval. "Dr. Gordon," Olivia called to the veterinarian from Flagstaff who had traveled especially for the event. "Do you have any idea what might have happened to the other 2 siblings?" The doctor adjusted her glasses, consulting her records. "According to reports from the time, there were sightings of 2 puppies heading towards Prescott, but we were never able to confirm anything." Olivia exchanged a significant look with her mother. Sarah nodded, immediately understanding her daughter's thoughts. You're thinking of expanding the search, aren't you? Sarah asked. Not just that, Olivia responded, her mind working at full speed. I'm thinking of creating a national network for searching and reuniting animal families. We could use DNA technology, social media, establish connections with shelters across the country. Maria approached with a tray of refreshments, followed by Mrs. Green. Miss Olivia is right, the housekeeper commented. How many other animal families are out there separated waiting to be reunited? And not just in Arizona, Mrs. Green added. This story has touched hearts all over the world. The comments on social media are coming from everywhere. Olivia turned to her Uncle Edward. What do you think? Would it be possible to create a standardized protocol for these types of searches? Edward smiled, proud of his niece. With the right team and necessary resources, absolutely. In fact, I've already been in contact with several colleagues who are interested in the project. And I can take care of the legal framework, Sarah intervened, her fingers already moving over the tablet. We could create a specific foundation for this, with international branches. One of the adoptive families, the Garcias from Flagstaff, approached the group. We want to be part of this, Mr. Garcia declared. Our Sol has always had this special gift for connecting with other dogs. Now we understand why. Olivia observed the 5 siblings playing together, with Aurora supervising the reunion like a small guardian. The scene was a living testimony to the power of love and family connection. You know what's most beautiful about all this? Mrs. Green reflected. That it began with an act of kindness. Goofball protecting Aurora, and now look at everything that has emerged from that moment. Like ripples in water, Maria added poetically. One act of love generating ever-widening circles. Olivia felt her mother's hand on her shoulder. So, what's the next step? Sarah asked, her voice full of determination. First, Olivia responded, focusing her camera on the reunited dogs, we'll document this reunion. People need to see that miracles are possible. Then, she turned to the group, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. I propose we create United Stars, an international network dedicated to reuniting separated animal families. I like that name, Edward smiled. Because of the star-shaped marks? Because of that. And because each successful story will be like a star guiding other families towards their reunion, Olivia explained. Sarah was already typing on her tablet. We can register the name tomorrow itself and start establishing the legal protocols for DNA tests and information exchange between shelters. Dr. Gordon joined the conversation. Count on the veterinary community of Flagstaff. This reunion has shown that nothing is impossible when we work together. At that moment, Goofball approached the group, followed by his siblings and Aurora. The dog that had once been rescued during a storm had now become the catalyst for a movement that promised to change the lives of countless animals and their families. Look at them, Olivia whispered to her mother. Each found their own way, their own adoptive family, but that original bond remains intact. Like us, Sarah responded softly, hugging her daughter. Sometimes we need to separate to find our true way back home. The main office of the Blackwood shelter buzzed with activity. A week after the emotional family reunion, the United Stars project had come to life with unexpected force. Olivia, surrounded by monitors showing video conferences with shelters from different parts of Arizona, coordinated the implementation of the search program. So, does everyone have access to the shared database? She asked, while Sarah organized the legal documents in a digital folder. Confirmed, a coordinator from Tucson responded. We've already started registering the DNA profiles of our residents. At that moment, Maria hurriedly entered the office. Miss Olivia, you have to see this. An email just arrived from a nun in Prescott. Olivia opened the email on the main screen, allowing everyone to see it. Sister Carmen from the convent of St. Rose had seen Goofball's story on the news. Her message included a photograph that made everyone hold their breath. 2 golden retrievers with the unmistakable star-shaped mark on their chests had been living in the convent for years. It can't be, Sarah whispered, adjusting her glasses. Could it be them? Edward, who had just entered with the latest DNA results from the reunited siblings, approached the screen. The mark is identical, and the age matches. It could be the 2 missing siblings, Olivia completed, her voice trembling with emotion. Sister Carmen says they arrived during a storm 5 years ago. The nuns took them in, And since then, they've been living in the convent, helping with the garden and the therapy program for children. Mrs. Green, who was quietly knitting in her usual corner while Aurora napped in her lap, smiled. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Who would have thought the last siblings would be in a convent? Aurora woke up and stretched lazily, as if sensing the excitement in the air. The kitten, who had become a kind of shelter ambassador, now helped welcome and calm each new animal that arrived. We must go to Prescott, Olivia decided, already beginning to organize the trip on her tablet. If it's really them— One moment, Sarah interrupted with her lawyer voice. First, we need to confirm with DNA tests. We can't create false expectations. Your mother is right, Edward agreed. I propose we send a team to Prescott to perform the tests in situ. The nuns may not want to separate from the dogs immediately. Olivia nodded, understanding. In the past few weeks, she had learned to temper her enthusiasm with the prudence her mother so valued. You're right. But you know what? This is exactly the kind of situation we created United Stars for. Maria, who had been organizing the shelter's photo archive, looked up. Have you noticed something? Since we started with this project, Aurora seems more attentive to new rescues. As if he understood the importance of reuniting families. It was true. The white kitten had developed a special gift for consoling newly arrived animals, especially those showing signs of having been separated from their families. Speaking of Aurora, Mrs. Green commented, have you noticed how Goofball and his siblings have adopted him as part of their pack? It's as if the family keeps growing. Olivia approached the window, observing the garden where Goofball played with Star and some of the shelter's new residents. You know what's most beautiful about all this? That each story, each reunion, each little miracle we achieve inspires others not to lose hope. And speaking of inspiration, Sarah added, showing her tablet, requests to join the United Stars network keep pouring in. Shelters from New Mexico, California, Texas. It's becoming something bigger than us, Edward reflected, reviewing the data on his computer. Each DNA test we perform, each family we help reunite, is creating a map of hope. Maria approached with a coffee tray for everyone. You know, my grandmother always said that stars guide us home. It seems she was right, though not in the way we imagined. Olivia hugged her mother, who returned the gesture with contained emotion. Thank you, she whispered, for believing in me, even when my path seemed crazy. No, my love, Sarah responded softly. Thank you for teaching me that success and personal fulfillment can take many different forms. Aurora chose that moment to jump onto the desk, walking among the papers with the elegance that characterized him. He stopped in front of the photograph of the convent dogs, as if giving his approval to the next chapter of this developing story. Well, Olivia said, picking up her camera, who's coming with me to Prescott? Everyone, Sarah responded without hesitation. After all, this is no longer just a project. It's our family mission. The convent of St. Rose stood majestic against the blue Prescott sky, its colonial walls bathed in the morning sun. Olivia, Sarah, Edward and Mrs. Green descended from the van, while Maria stayed in Sedona taking care of the shelter and the other animals. It's beautiful, Olivia sighed, adjusting her camera to capture the historic facade. Sister Carmen was waiting for them at the entrance, a petite woman with a serene face and bright eyes. Welcome, the nun greeted them with a warm smile. Sun and Moon are waiting for you in the garden. Sun and Moon? Sarah asked, as they followed the nun through the convent's corridors. That's what we call them, Sister Carmen explained, because of their personalities. Sun is the most extroverted, always seeking light and attention. Moon is quieter, more contemplative. They arrived during the strongest storm Prescott had seen in years. The convent garden was an oasis of peace and beauty. Orderly orchards extended in all directions, and in the midst of them, two golden retrievers with the unmistakable star-shaped mark on their chests played with a group of children. They're part of our therapy program, Sister Carmen continued. We work with children from the local orphanage and some with special needs, Sun and Moon. They've been an indescribable blessing. Edward slowly approached the dogs, his clinical eye evaluating their characteristics. There was no doubt. They were identical to Goofball and his other siblings. A small boy, who until then had been hugging Moon, approached the group. Are you going to take them away? He asked with a trembling voice. Sister Carmen knelt beside the little one. Miguel, do you remember what we talked about regarding families? Olivia, understanding the delicacy of the situation, also crouched down to the child's height. You know, I have a story to tell you about other very special dogs with a mark just like Sun and Moon's. As Olivia shared the story of Goofball and his siblings, more children and nuns gathered around, forming an attentive circle. Sun and Moon, as if understanding that they were being talked about, sat quietly in the center of the group. "So," said an older nun, the Mother Superior, who had quietly joined the group, "are they part of the family that was lost in Flagstaff?" "We believe so," Edward responded, showing the photographs of Goofball and the other siblings. "With your permission, we'd like to perform DNA tests to confirm it." "Of course," the Mother Superior nodded. "But I have one condition." Sarah stepped forward, prepared to negotiate any necessary legal terms, but the nun surprised her with her request. "If they are really part of that family, we want to be part of United Stars. These dogs have brought so much joy and healing to our community. There are other children, other convents, that could benefit from a similar program." Olivia exchanged an excited look with her mother. "That would be wonderful. In fact, I think we could learn a lot from your experience with animal-assisted therapy." "Look!" Miguel suddenly exclaimed. San had approached Olivia and was sniffing with interest at the bag where she carried her computer. "There's something else," Sister Carmen said, pulling out a worn photo album. "We've documented every moment since they arrived. Every smile they've provoked, every little miracle." The pages of the album revealed a story of love and healing. Sun and Moon playing with children in wheelchairs, accompanying therapy sessions, comforting little ones who had just arrived at the orphanage. "They're not just dogs," the Mother Superior explained. "They're angels with furry skin, as we say here." Mrs. Green, who had been unusually silent, finally spoke. "You know, this reminds me of Aurora. He has the same gift for healing hearts." Edward completed the DNA testing procedure gently, while Sun and Moon cooperated with a calmness that seemed to confirm their lineage. "Regardless of the result," Olivia said, photographing the dogs with the children, "this is bigger than a simple family reunion. It's the beginning of something new." "You're right," Sarah agreed, watching how her daughter interacted with the children and the dogs. "Each story we uncover shows us new ways of doing good." Sister Carmen smiled as she served fresh lemonade to everyone. "In the convent, we believe that God doesn't make coincidences, only miracles. And this family of dogs with stars on their chests, they're a miracle that keeps expanding." Miguel approached Olivia again. "Can we visit their siblings someday? Moon always looks at the stars at night. Maybe she misses her family." "Of course," Olivia responded with moist eyes. "And maybe we can create something special together. A program that unites more families, that helps more children." "United Stars has just found its true mission," Sarah murmured, hugging her daughter as they watched Sun and Moon playing with the children under the Prescott sun. The Blackwood mansion shone under the setting sun as the final preparations for the inauguration ceremony of the United Stars Animal Therapy Center took shape. 6 months had passed since the discovery of Sun and Moon at the convent of St. Rose, and the project had evolved beyond Olivia's wildest dreams. "The DNA tests confirmed it," Edward explained to a group of journalists in the garden. "Sun and Moon are definitely part of the family. With them, all 7 siblings are finally reunited." In the newly constructed therapy area, Sarah supervised the installation of a commemorative plaque. "Each star guides someone home," she read aloud, running her fingers over the engraved letters. "It's perfect," Mrs. Green said, who now directed the center's volunteer program. "Like the stars on the chests of our guardians." Olivia, capturing every moment with her camera, marveled at how her initial vision had transformed into something much more significant. The shelter not only reunited animal families, it was now also a healing center for people. Sister Carmen and several children from the orphanage had traveled from Prescott for the inauguration. Sun and Moon, who now divided their time between the convent and the center, ran happily with their siblings in the garden specially designed for therapy. "You know," said Miguel, the little boy from the orphanage, as he petted Aurora, "when Moon looks at the sky now, she doesn't seem sad anymore. I think she found what she was looking for." Maria appeared with a tray of hot chocolate for the children. "It's like my grandmother used to say, love always finds its way back home." At that moment, Goofball, The dog who had started it all with his act of kindness towards Aurora approached the group followed by Star. The 7 siblings gathered in the center of the garden, forming a perfect circle around Aurora, as if they were posing for a photograph. "It's incredible," the Mother Superior murmured, who had also come for the inauguration. "How a simple act of love can trigger so much good in the world." Olivia felt her mother's hand on her shoulder. "When you abandoned your law career," Sarah said softly, "I thought you were giving up on making justice in the world. I didn't understand that you were choosing a different and perhaps deeper way of healing and uniting." "Mom, no, let me finish," Sarah insisted, her eyes bright. "You've created something extraordinary here. Not just a shelter or a therapy center, but a place where miracles happen every day." Edward joined them, holding the latest DNA test results. "And the best part is that this is just the beginning. Shelters from all over the continent want to implement the United Stars program. The network keeps growing. Like a constellation, Mrs. Green added, pointing to the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. The inauguration ceremony began at sunset. The garden lights came on, creating a magical atmosphere. Olivia, standing in front of the podium, observed the gathered crowd. Her family, the nuns, the orphanage children, veterinarians, volunteers, adoptive families, all united by a chain of love that had begun with a dog and a kitten. "A year ago," she began, "Goofball taught us an invaluable lesson when he decided to protect a small, frightened kitten. He showed us that family isn't about blood or species, but about love and compassion." Aurora, as if understanding they were talking about him, elegantly climbed onto the podium and sat next to Olivia, eliciting laughter and sighs of tenderness from those present. "Today," Olivia continued, "we not only celebrate the reunion of a family of extraordinary dogs, but the birth of a new way of understanding healing and love. United Stars is more than a family reunification or assisted therapy program. It's a testament that when we open our hearts, miracles happen." Sarah, who had prepared a formal speech for the occasion, tucked it into her purse and simply hugged her daughter. Words were unnecessary. Her presence there, supporting Olivia's dream, said everything that needed to be said. The 7 siblings, as if they had rehearsed, began to howl softly under the starry sky. Aurora joined in with a soft meow, and for a magical moment, everything seemed to be in perfect harmony. "And this," Olivia concluded, with tears of joy in her eyes, "is just the first page of our story, because every star in the sky is a reminder that love, in all its forms, always finds its way home." As night fell over Sedona, the Blackwood mansion shone like a beacon of hope. In the garden, humans and animals celebrated together, united by a bond stronger than blood or species. The transformative power of unconditional love. And at the center of it all, Goofball and Aurora, the unlikely friends who had started this extraordinary adventure, rested together under the stars, silent guardians of a new era of compassion and healing.